Okay, so this is part 3 of the MIP 410 restoration project. As you can see here, the front end is almost finished. I'm waiting on a few parts to come in before I complete it. So, namely, on the lower end here, I just put in 2 screws to hold the bulkhead in place because I have the original aluminum screws here, but they're mostly worn. So I'm just waiting on new ones to come in before I permanently mount the bulkhead onto the nose plate. And this is also a dummy nose plate because the bottom has a scratch on it. The actual one I'm going to be using is this. So this is really more of a mock-up of what I plan on doing here. But in any case, I just want to show you what I have so far. Last time I mentioned how to set up the front Worlds type or RC10T shock tower to fit the 410 gearbox, and there are a few extra things you have to do when it comes to mounting this whole tower with the gearbox assembly onto the bulkhead. So if we look on a standard setup here, so this you would have on an RC10T, for example, or a normal Worlds front end, the screws that you use to mount the tower to the bulkhead are these, I believe they're called cap head screws. But the problem is the thickness of this cap head is just enough such that the diff outdrive will bind against that screw head if you try to mount it all together, because that diff outdrive, it runs really close up to this cap head here. The gearbox is really, smushed up against the shock tower. So there's not a lot of space here between where the outdrive is and where the tower is. So a simple way around that is to use a button head screw, which is, it has like a rounded sort of cap or a head on the screw. And that gives you just enough space. It's really hard to see around all the parts, but that little glimmer there you see near the outdrive, that's the button head screw. Just barely clears the outdrive, okay? So that's one thing I had to do to make this all work. The other thing has to do with the inner camber link ball stud. So this shock tower is from RC Carbon Works, and to their credit, they do some neat things here, like give you a few more mounting hole options for both the shocks themselves as well as the ball stud. So there's a high roll center hole on the bottom and a low roll center hole on the top. The bottom hole is sort of the stock hole that you would get on an original tower. Now, if you were to use the bottom hole, what would happen is, as I'm using here, is the suspension fully compresses. The dog bone to the universal will actually bump up against the ball cup here, okay? And that's a problem. Now, you could use a thinner ball cup, but it would still eventually, bump up against this. If you move the ball stud to the top hole, you won't have that problem at full compression. However, the ball cup itself will rub up against the nose brace tube, okay? And the RPM ball cups are a thicker material, so it might be just thick enough such that it rubs. Maybe if you used something like the older, like these white ball cups here that are much thinner, it may work. I'm not sure, but I really like the color of the fluorescent yellow, so I want to stick with that. So I'm basically opting to use the lower hole, and I'm basically going to bet that I won't need this much suspension travel, because if you think about where the nose is here, and then as I compress the arm all the way, that's where it fully binds, okay? So with a 2.2-inch wheel on that axle, chances are the nose will be bottomed out by the time this dog bone hits the ball cup here. So, just put some up travel limiters in the shocks to hold this back a bit, and you should be okay. So that's the way I'm kind of forced to do this in a sense. So that more or less covers it for the center here. Moving to the outside, these are the Dynotech arms, the Klein front arms. And setting this up was a little bit easier than for my other RC10 restoration where I used these arms. I made a video of that about a year ago. That's the one with the blue chassis. You can take a look if you want. What I did here was more or less the same thing on the inside. So you have to bore out the hole on the arm itself to fit the hinge pin. You also have to remove a little bit of material on the inside so that it moves freely without rubbing against the bulkhead. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and also you have to, round off the corners with a sanding bit or a grinding bit or something so that it doesn't bind against the nose plate as the suspension compresses. On the outside, I didn't really have to change much because I'm not using a hinge pin here. I'm using a screw. I'll get to that in a second. But what I did have to do was take a router bit and sort of sharpen off the inside corners of the opening at the front and the rear of the opening as well. So what I decided to do here was to use a Yokomo YZ10 870C caster block because I wanted to use basically a different assembly from the stock assembly, right? This is the stock MIP assembly, and it's kind of flimsy, it's all plastic, and the actual kingpins are just these little set screws or grub screws. So it's kind of fragile, and you know, I'm not going to run this, but I wanted to try something different. So the thing with using this Yokomo part is that it has a metric opening. And so I needed to use a 3mm screw or maybe a 3mm hinge pin, if not a screw, to really fit this without having it wobble around. But I figured I'd use a screw and just, you know, close it off at the other end with a lock nut. And you can tell that this is a gold colored lock nut to match the tinitride coated ball studs all around. And where I used the 440 threads, like on these tinitride coated ball studs, I have the associated gold lock nuts as well. So a little bit for bling factor there, but I think it's pretty nice. So let's see. That's what's going on there. The actual universal that I'm using is a Yokomo ZD 423. I think they also make a ZC 423. It's a front universal for the Works YZ10, so the 91, the 92, the 93 Works YZ10. I believe also the 94 use this front universal, and it fits pretty well. At full compression, there's a little bit of, actually, maybe not so much with the ball cup on here, but if you remove the ball cup and you try to compress all the way up, the end of the dog bone will hit the inside of the diff outdrive. But now that you have this kind of limit here that you're forced to put on the suspension travel, that's not really a problem. So the length of the dog bone is pretty much perfect. So it seems to work okay. I do have some Team Suzuki blue anodized wheel hubs that I'll be using on the front. I also want to use them on the rear to make everything match. That may be a little challenging on the rear because, again, this is a metric unit. This is a metric wheel axle. So to do that on the rear, I may have to use a different type of hub carrier and play games with that. But I'll cross that bridge when I get there. This steering knuckle is an aluminum steering knuckle. It is an aftermarket component. It might be a GPM part made for the YZ10. I'm not entirely sure. It may also have been made, or it might be a part for the Kyosho Laser ZX or the Kyosho Optima Mid, because the Optima Mid and the Laser and the old YZ10s had some interchangeable parts, like the steering knuckle and the caster blocks. They weren't exactly the same, but you could use them between the chassis. So I'm not entirely sure if this is for the YZ10 or one of the Kyoshos, but nevertheless, it fits just fine. The only issue, which is kind of a strange one, is that the kingpins that actually came with the caster block are too large for the caster block. So you can see that there's, you know, a certain amount of material here on the top and the bottom of the caster block. And on the kingpin itself, there's a smooth part and a threaded part. And the smooth part towards the top is actually longer than the thickness of this plastic material here. So that's a little awkward. There's a bit of a gap here. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to fill that in with a washer or something, but I'll figure that out. Yeah, so that's it for now. Once the aluminum screws come in, I'll put those screws on, right, and mount it all onto this. And then I have the yellow front bumper that'll go on there. Let's see, anything else I want to point out? Oh, right, so the gold lock nut, the 3mm lock nut that goes in this 3mm screw here, that's made by OFNA. They make these gold lock nuts. And the actual screw that I'm using, it's a ProTech 3x30mm screw to go through this front part here. Okay, and it's just about the right length, maybe a millimeter too long, but it's, you know, perfectly fine for this. Lunsford turnbuckles, and these turnbuckles, it's a set for the RC10 Worlds, and even though I have longer front arms here, they seem to be okay. Let's see, I think that's it for now. When I finish the front, and I suppose when I start working on the rear, I'll make another video. So, thanks for watching.